What brings you joy? For the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about what brings us joy and how we can stay plugged into joy. And the reason that we're doing this is because a lot of us don't realize what actually brings us joy. And it's not from a lack of trying, because when we think about it, every time we open a magazine, every time we listen to the radio, every time we go onto the internet or watch TV, everywhere we go, there are people that we have never met creating ads and all kinds of things that promise us that what they are offering will bring us joy. And if we're being honest, most of us could admit that we have fallen for that promise at least once or twice. You see, in the world of marketing, they have actually come up with a strategy called joy marketing. And they've developed this because they know that emotions rule our decision making. Here are a couple of examples. Following their worst sales results in over a decade, McDonald's relaunched their "I'm Loving It" campaign with a twist. While the original campaign asked people to talk about their happiest moments in McDonald's, the new one actually created memories. Taking shape over the course of one day, McDonald's set out to bring moments of joy to 24 cities across the globe. And as a result, people associated feelings of happiness with the McDonald's brand. They created an emotional connection built on joy. I know that I have bought into the McDonald's lie far too many times to count, thanks to M&M McFlurries. Another example is the Coke campaign. I'd like to buy the world a Coke. The man responsible for this campaign said, "I began to see a bottle of Coke as more than a drink, instead creating a tiny bit of commonality between all people, a universally liked formula. I could see and hear a song that treated the whole world as if it were a person that they would like to help and get to know." Becker's vision played out successfully, and the ad resonated with millions of people across the globe. Coke received more than 100,000 letters praising the ad, and thousands of requests were made for the sheet music. We think, if only I had, if only we drove, if only I owned, if only, then maybe I would feel more joy. And we spend a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money thinking that that thing will bring me joy. And the reality is that because we are surrounded by all of these voices and messages and thinking all of the time, we forget what actually brings us joy. And so that's why we're going to pause for a bit, and we're going to remind ourselves over these next few weeks what genuinely brings us joy. Now, to do that, we first need to make sure that we're all on the same page with the definition of this thing we call joy. The word happy comes from the root of the Greek word hap, which literally means chance. It's the root of several other words in the English language, words like happen, happening, hapless, even haphazard. Happiness is a glad feeling that depends on something good happening. And we often use words like happy and joy like they are one and the same, but they actually have very different meanings. Psychologists suggest that happiness is triggered externally. It's based on other people, things, places, and events in our lives and how we allow them to affect us. But joy is cultivated internally. And it has much more to do with finding peace and contentment in who we are. Joy is something that remains. It can even remain in the middle of really tough stuff. And we're going to explore that more in the coming weeks. The word happy only appears in the Bible 25 times, but the word joy appears 187 times. Rejoice or rejoiced appears 240 more times. God's desire is for you and for I to experience joy much more than fleeting happiness. It's also really important for us to know that joy is not a feeling, happiness is a feeling. Joy is a choice. With that in mind, my favourite definition comes from a guy named Wes Stafford. He was the former president and CEO of Compassion International. He says, joy is a decision, a really brave one, about how we are going to respond to life. So with that foundation, with all of that in mind, we're going to jump straight to our first big point of the series. Joy is more about a who than a what. We learn this from when we're really young. When we think about our significant childhood memories, the things that truly brought us joy, these memories are generally attached to a who rather than a what. When we think about whether school was a good experience for us or not, it generally isn't because we had the best iPad, the best bike, or even the best grades. It's more often than not based on who our friends were and how they treated us. It's based on our teachers and how they impacted us, whether they believed in us. If joy came from a what, we'd all just go out and get that what, and we'd always be filled with joy. And it wouldn't matter how you treated me, because I'd just go home and I'd get my what, because that's what would bring me joy, and it would fill me back up, and we'd all just be filled with joy. But the fact is, and this isn't news to us, but our what always leads to what else. We could call it caffeine joy or V-joy. It wears off over time. It wears off over actually a very short period of time. You know, we were just as excited when we got our old phone, when we got it, as we are when we get our new phone. But over time, we need what the new what offers. It's the same with our car, with our clothes, with our job, whatever what we think brings us joy. But if our aging what deflates our joy, then we never really had joy to begin with. We just bought into the lie that it would. We hear it from just about every person that goes on one of our mission trips. We go to places where the people we meet don't have anywhere near what we have. Some of them live in extreme poverty. And what is so often said is, how can they be so happy when they don't have anything? And at the same time, we can't wait to get back to our world with lots of what. And we realise that often the people that we meet who live in extreme poverty experience and live with more joy and more contentment than most of the people that we know back home with all the what they want. It's because joy is not about a what. The other reason that we know this is that at the end of our lives, I've never heard anyone who has possessional regrets. The regrets that we experience are relational. I've never heard of anyone on their deathbed who asked their loved ones to just bring in their shoes so they could spend a bit more time with them, or their phone, or their laptop, or their car. Our ultimate fulfillment is always going to be tied to a who or some who's, not some what's. because joy is relational by nature. And when I think of a book of the Bible that is relational by nature, I immediately think of the book of John. Alexander Shire, in talking about the Gospels, says that Matthew and Mark ask us to continue to move, but John asks us to abide and receive. The Gospel of John is considered to be the book of love. The word love appears 57 times in the Gospel of John, more often than the other three Gospels put together. And it appears 46 more times in 1 John. John seems to understand this more than most. He even identifies himself as the disciple who Jesus loved. And I've got to admit, this used to really annoy me. I used to think, who do you think you are to say that you're more special than the other disciples? But a book called The Shack changed my thinking about this. It's one of my favourite books. It's what I would call a modern day parable. It has characters that represent the Trinity and our relationship with each one, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. And the character who plays God the Father says to the character in the book that is struggling to come to terms with the horrific situation that life has thrown at him, he says, "I am especially fond of you." Now again, initially I thought, you can't say that. You're God. If you say that to him, then where does that put me? But I continued to read the book, and as I continued to read it, I discovered that this character who plays God the Father goes on to say, "I'm especially fond of you," to every different person he interacts with. And it all made sense to me. It became real. God is especially fond of me, but God is especially fond of you as well. John saw himself as the disciple who Jesus loved, but he knew that God also loved Matthew and James and Judas. John completely understood, I believe more than any other author in the Bible, that God is love, and that it's him and only him that brings us joy. It's what his whole book is about. From beginning to end, John is communicating that through the person of Jesus, through what he did and what he said, he's making us aware that God's love is for all of us. He's attempting to reveal God, to make him real, to make him tangible and accessible for everyone. In his gospel, joy is apparent all the way through. Carl mentioned it earlier. God so loved the world that he sent his only son to show us what love looks like with skin on, to give us perspective, to show us a better way. He effectively came to earth through his son, it says, not to judge us, but to bring us life. We are fully and completely loved. We are saved already today. Based on nothing we have done, we have access to his life. We can plug into his life and access all that we need. We can access love and peace and wisdom and patience and, of course, joy. This is the heart of what John is trying to communicate. If we can come to grips with the message of John, we will come to know that we can experience joy and all these other attributes of Jesus today. Jesus brings the joy. We don't have to keep working hard. We don't have to keep slogging away at trying to be good Christians and hope that at the end of time we will make it. John's gospel tells us that we have already made it because of what has already happened for us in and through Jesus. If we get that, church, if we can understand that, it brings joy like nothing else ever has before and like nothing else ever will in the future. You know, when someone dies, we often think back to our last conversation with that person. We remember, we reflect on what we said to each other. Well, on the night before Jesus died, he shared a meal and a conversation with his disciples. And although they didn't understand that Jesus was about to die, he did. He knew his time was short, and John recorded a lot of their conversation. It's found in John chapters 14 to 16. And we read there that Jesus comforted his disciples first. He said, "Don't worry." I love that Jesus starts with this. He assures them that although he's going away, he's going to come back. And he explains that the Spirit will come and dwell inside them and be with them always. He also taught them in these chapters to remain. He told them that he was like a vine and they were like branches, and together they would bear much fruit. He said, if you do what I ask, we can do great things together. And people will see who I am and who and what I represent. Then Jesus explained why he was telling them all these things. And this next bit is a little bit surprising because we can so often get caught up in what we're supposed to do that we often forget the reason Jesus wants us to do what he's asking. He says, I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy, and so that your joy will overflow, so that my joy inside of you will pour out into the people that you come in contact with. Do people experience joy when they interact with you? Jesus is concerned about our joy. At the height of his own pain, his own agony, his love desired our joy. It's pretty unbelievable when you think about it. And Jesus isn't hoping that we will experience just a little bit of joy. He wants us to experience joy that is abundant, that not only fills us up, but overflows into the people around us. Our joy matters to Jesus, but living out our joy matters to him as well. Because here's what Jesus knows. He knows that joy isn't found in our what. It's not found in the latest and greatest gadget. It's not found in getting our way or having more money, more adventure, or more stuff. Jesus is the source of our joy, and he's also the sustainer of it. Our desire for joy is ultimately a desire for Jesus. So how do we sustain joy? How do we remain plugged into joy? Well, John tells us that as well. John 15 and from verse 9, he says, I have loved you, even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I have told you these things so that you will be filled with my joy, and so that your joy will overflow. This is telling us that obeying God's commands will fill us with joy. And this can be hard to believe because often church, just like the Jews, turn the commandments into a life-sucking, crazy long list of rules that focus much more on outward behaviour rather than inward transformation. And so how will that ever bring me joy? Well, he goes on to make it really clear. I think he's saying, in case you're wondering what set of commandments I'm talking about, in case you're confused, in case you're thinking I'm talking about the 600 plus rules that you have turned the 10 commandments into, in case you need clarification, here goes from verse 12. This is my commandment. Love each other in the same way I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. Matthew puts it this way: love God with all of your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. John makes it really clear that love is best communicated by actions, not words. And when we love others using actions, it brings us joy. He could have said it this way: I don't care what your theology of love looks like unless you're living out that theology. I don't care what it means in the Greek or the Hebrew unless you're actually looking after your neighbour. I don't care that you might be talking about it until you're blue in the face. If you aren't actually loving and caring for people who are both like you and unlike you, then your joy will definitely not be full, which will make it impossible for it to overflow. That's why he describes joy the way he does. Yes, God cares about our joy, but he also cares about how we allow that joy to flow into the people around us. Am I known for loving other people? Am I known for pouring joy into the people around me? Because at the end of the day, our words don't matter unless they are combined with our actions. They have to go together. Actions are the only things that counts when it comes to making love known, when it comes to revealing who God is. That's why we're doing this series. It's why we're looking at how to live out this commandment better, why we're learning how we can love God more, how we can learn to love ourselves more, and as a result, how we can love others the way they need, how we can genuinely show up and make a difference for others. That's the story of John. It's the purpose of his gospel. That's how he wants us to live. It's why in Jesus' final words to his disciples, he spoke about the vine and the branches. In essence, it's saying that although I'm no longer on earth, although I'm no longer clothed in humanity, through you, when you remain plugged into me, when you stay connected to me, then I effectively remain alive and I continue to live out all that I promised I would through you. I continue to live peace and kindness and goodness, gentleness, self-control, love and joy in the world. In the Adventist Church, we often quote Ellen White. Ellen, if you don't know, is one of the founding members of the Adventist Church. And she heard the voice of God really clearly, and she wrote a lot of that down, and we have produced a lot of books from her writings. But there are two passages of Scripture, there are two passages in the Bible that she quoted all of the time. The first of those is what we've just been talking about, the vine and the branches. And the second, interestingly for us at Papster, is Isaiah 58. I believe that she quoted these passages so much because she knew that living love was the most important thing we could do to reveal Jesus. But she also knew how incredibly difficult it would be to live Isaiah 58. She knew that it would be hard for us to love people in real and practical ways. She knew that when we choose to live that way, we would be criticised and sometimes even ridiculed. She knew that the message of practical love would be minimised and even rejected by people who should uphold it. She knew that to sustain joy, to sustain love, to sustain the living out of Isaiah 58, we would need to be connected to the vine. We would need to be plugged in to the source of love and joy itself. She knew that this mattered more than anything else. So how do we plug in? Well, it's different for all of us. But our challenge to you this morning is find a way that works for you. Find a way that inspires you and challenges you. We can set time aside to read what he has to say in his word. We can attend groups that help us hear his voice and hold us accountable. We can talk to him throughout our day. We can plug into him through music or nature. Whatever it is that works for you, do that. And if you're not sure what it is that works for you, my challenge is that you would just try a little bit of everything until you find something that works. Something that helps you stay plugged in to the source. As the team come up, I want us to think about how we experience joy. Because if we want to experience true joy, then we need to stay connected to the vine. We need to remain plugged into the source of joy. Because it's available for me and it's available for you. And I believe that God's cry today and every day is plug into me. I want you to experience all that I have to offer because it will make your life better and it will make life better for the people around you. So we're going to sing the song again that we just learnt. And I want you to think about how you can plug into joy as you sing this song. I want you to think about how you can stay connected to God. I want us to be aware of all that he's done for us. And I want us to let that wash over us this morning as we sing. And I'd invite you to stand and surrender to him. I'd invite you this morning as we sing to declare how much you need him and how much you want him more in your life. Let's just do that as we sing.